Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Development Control A Committee. May I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that you maintain social distancing from all other persons whilst in the chamber and in the communal areas. Please ensure that you wear a face mask covering at all times, unless you're sitting down or if you're exempt from doing so, and that you use the hand sanitizer and wipes that have been provided. Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers or hold separate conversations whilst others are speaking. If you are attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Please ensure your mobile phones are on silent or switched off and that your laptops are switched to silent. We will be using e-voting for this meeting on the modern.gov.app. So please, could members make sure they are logged in and ready to use this app? Confirm that's true. Thank you. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be recorded, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the Council to have consented to being recorded. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. If you hear the fire alarm, leave the building immediately via the fire exit and make your way to the assembly point, which is Ipswich Town Football Ground. Follow the signs directing you to the fire exits at each end of the floor. Do not enter the atrium, ground floor area and walkways. If you are in the atrium at the time of the alarm, follow the signs to the nearest fire exit. Use the stairs, not the lifts, and do not enter or re-enter the building until told it's safe to do so. And before we start with the actual meetings, it's appropriate to make some introductions. So down on my right, we have the Area Planning Manager, John Pateman G. Our Legal Advisor, which is Ian DePrez. Case Officers, we have Alex Scott today and Marcia Cavani. We have Governance Officer Claire Philpott on my right. And to my left, Alicia Norman from the Democratic Services and Beth Webb, who's a Trainee Governance Officer, both critical to making sure this runs smoothly throughout the day. We have ward members today speaking. They are Councillor Helen Geek and Councillor Roland Warboys. And at Mid-Suffolk District Council, a ward member cannot vote on applications in their ward. There's a change to the agenda prior to going to the agenda, and that is that we're going to do 8C first. So it'll be 8C, followed by 8A, and then 8B. If you could prepare yourselves for that. Can I move to the agenda, please? Apologies for absence and substitutions. Do we have any?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Hicks and Councillor Whitehead is substituting.
Thank you. We're going to receive declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members. Are there any to declare? Councillor Mayor.
Mr James Bailey from 8A lives in my ward, and obviously we have had dealings regarding Parish Council.
Thank you. Declarations of lobbying. There are. Yep, Councillor Evan.
Thank you, Chair. Stonham, email from Stonham Parish Council for item B.
Okay, so Councillor Mansell and Councillor Field as well. Thank you. Declarations of personal site visits, if any. Councillor Mansell.
When the Stonham case came before committee before, I had to make my own personal site inspection because I was unable to attend the organised one by the council. It was, a couple of years ago. I don't think it's really that important, but I thought I'd better say it anyway. No,
always right to state it. Thank you. And now we'll move on to confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of January 2022, pages 8 to 13 of the agenda. Are there any points regarding the accuracy of the minutes? In that case, can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Passmore, the seconder. Councillor Mansell. Governance Officer will now conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, if you go into your ModGov app and select the cross in the top right-hand corner, this vote is now in progress. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 7 votes for and 1 abstention, as Councillor Whitehead was not at that previous meeting.
Yeah, thank you. And therefore, the minutes are approved, and the minutes of the meeting have been confirmed and will be signed post this meeting. We'll now move on to confirmations of the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of February 2022, pages 15 to 28. Are there any points regarding accuracy of these minutes? None. Could I have a proposer, please? Yeah, Councillor Matthiasson, and a seconder, Councillor Passmore. And Governance Officer will now conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, again, that vote is now in progress.
It won't take mine, it's 4. Mine won't work.
Thank you, Chair. As your vote is not, you're not able to take your vote.
No, I'm 4.
Thank you. So that's 7 votes for and again 1 abstention. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, the minutes are approved and therefore they'll be signed at the end of this meeting. So, agenda point 7, to receive notification of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. We'll now move to the schedule of planning applications. We're going to go initially to 8C, and that's on page 243 of your agenda. Councillor Matthiasson.
Terribly sorry about this, Chair, but you weren't at the February meeting, so you shouldn't really have voted for it.
Thank you very much. In that case, I abstain. Still carried, and I'll sign at the end of this meeting. Thank you for that point. Really important. Okay, so we're going to move to 8C. Now invite the case officer, Marcia Caviani, to introduce the application to the committee. Marcia.
Good morning, everyone. The application is in Wickham, Skeith. Move on to this slide. First one. So this is the site, which is to the western side of Grange Road. And as you can see, there are some residential dwellings to the opposite side, to the north of the site and further south of the site. This is the wider context of the site, which is semi-rural countryside. This is the site, outlines the red line, the boundary of the site. It's slightly further away from the settlement boundary. The brown line here shows the existing settlement boundary of Wickham Skeith. 6 semi-detached dwellings have been proposed. The 2 in the middle are 2-bedroom dwellings, and these are 3-bedroom dwellings. The access is approved, and it was previously approved at a previous approval, which was for 2 5-bedroom dwellings. This is the elevation of the dwellings. As you can see, it's traditional conventional design and of modest size, and the garages. So these are 2-bedroom dwellings designs. A total floor area for these are 85 square meters, and they have 2 bedrooms. This is a design of the 3-bedroom dwellings, and they are at 125 square meters total floor area. And these are the garages, the single bay garages, again of similar style to the houses. And these are some pictures of the site, which is currently a paddock. As you can see, it's surrounded by trees and hedgerows. The design includes the retention of these trees and hedgerows, although none of these features are protected by TPO. And this is the view on Grange Road from the south, approaching the site. The speed limit is 30 miles per hour. And these are the houses opposite of the application site. As you can see, there are also semi-detached dwellings of similar scale. The application site is included in the new joint local plan. However, await given to this is reduced currently, as it's not an adopted document yet. However, the allocation is for 5 dwellings, and here we have 6 dwellings. Officer recommendation is approval. I leave this to the member to decide. Thank you very much. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Do you have any questions, please, Martha? Councillor Eber.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for that. Could you just explain, if for people living there, how I understand there's no footpaths along the road at all. So in order to get to like a shop or something, where do they need to go for that? Thank you.
No, there are no footpaths, and we are aware of the site being further away from Mendon, for example, which includes the services and facilities needed. So for that purposes, no, in terms of sustainability, it's some distance away from shops and services, so there are no footpaths immediately to the site. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Matthiasson.
Yeah, was the sustainability officer consulted about this? Only I couldn't find a comment. I think it was on this one.
Sorry, Councillor, is that a question for me? Yeah. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was inquiring. I couldn't see a response from the sustainability officer, environmental management officer, I think is the exact title. And I wondered whether either of them had been consulted.
The answer is no. They haven't been consulted. I didn't think they were consulted unless it was 10 or more dwellings, but I could be wrong. I wasn't sure, but I'd have to check that. But I find it unusual that they would be consulted with this level of development.
Can we confirm that's good education anyway?
I'd have to go away and find that out, but I thought it was only 10 or more we consulted them. We do consult environmental health as a whole, and that officer sits with environmental health, and we've consulted them a number of times in this application. So as a team, they would have been aware of this application, but I don't know. We haven't specifically consulted the sustainability officer of that team. Again, I thought the threshold was 10 or more dwellings, but I'd have to double check. So the answer is no, but I'd have to go back for something else.
The answer to that after the meeting, please.
Yeah, I think it's a good educational piece that we can all learn from. So you're absolutely right. If you would, John, thank you. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask about the hedge along the front of the road, along the front of the site adjacent to the road. It says in paragraph 5.8 that it is to be retained, and the trees on the site are also going to be remain. Can you just confirm that the access to this site is the same as the one that's already got permission for 2 dwellings, or is there some change to the amount of hedge that will obviously have to come down to make the access way? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the access is as approved previously. Thank you.
And the only bit of hedge to be removed is just to make the width of the roadway for the access.
That's right. That's what we've been.
And there are no issues with creating a visibility display.
Yes.
So the rest, we don't have to get rid of the other hedge just to make visibility. All the visibility is fine.
No, because the Suffolk County Council highways have been consulted and they haven't raised any objections in terms of visibility or any issues in that regard. So there will be no further taking out any hedges to create more visibility. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have one question actually, Martha. So on page 247, paragraph 1.3, it states it's not in a conservation area, yet I think from the ward members' email or letter that's contained in this report, it actually states it is in a conservation area. Can you confirm which it is, please?
If we could go back to the slide, I could show you where the conservation area ends. Thank you. Okay, so if you note the purple line, I don't know if it's very obvious, but yeah, it's hatched in purple. So that's where the conservation area is, and it's some distance away from the site.
Thank you. Objectors or supporters. We do have the agent, Sarah Roberts. Sarah, welcome. Okay.
Sorry, that's my fault.
No problem. Okay, before we go there, from the Parish Council, we will have the ward member reading out a statement. Councillor Warboys.
Thank you, Chair. This is the statement from the Wickham Skeith Parish Council, agreed at the meeting on the night before last Monday night. Wickham Skeith Parish Council has always objected to this development because it lies outside village envelope identified in the community consultation carried out by the council, and there's an original objection which includes this. Wickham Skeith Parish Council also considers 6 houses an overdevelopment of the site. The Parish Council also considers that the additional number of cars and associated movements, 6 houses with 3 cars per dwelling, will be a significant and excessive increase in the traffic. The application rests on the fact that it won't be visible, but there is no requirement for the hedgerows, which ensure the lack of visibility, to be maintained, or even an obligation for the hedgerows to remain. There is ambiguity in the application on who is responsible for the maintenance and protection of the hedgerows. The application needs to be conditional on this being clarified, along with the requirement that the hedgerows be maintained. That's from the Clerk of Wickham Skeith Parish Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any questions for Councillor Warboys as the parish? Councillor Mansell.
I think this actually might be a question for the officer, but it's been brought to my attention by what Councillor Warboys has just been saying. Now, if you look, when you look at the plan, each individual plot appears to have its own back garden, but the front all seems to be shared. So can you please perhaps give us some explanation about the responsibility of those open areas between the roadway and the hedge line and the hedge at the front of the property?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I'm just checking the...
If you get that plan of the site up, you can see a sort of the frontage. It doesn't look like private garden.
Okay, thank you. Let's have a look. That one, yeah. Okay, this area. The management of the site after it is occupied is for the owners of the properties to set up a company, limited company, to manage that. We don't normally condition applications of these size, but conditions could be applied to make sure that the management afterwards would be in place. But like I said, it's not something that we normally do for applications of this size.
But it is something that we could do.
That's not a question, really, at this point. We leave it to debate on that one. Mr. Pope-G, I'll try and get you that. Councillor Mansell.
Mr.
Pope-G come in.
I'm not meaning to undermine my officer here, but there are choices for the owner of the site, or the developer who takes it on. Ultimately, they could set up a private management company where these 6 dwellings all contribute and run together, and that deals with the essentially semi-public open space areas at the front. The other choice is they salami slice the various bits of land that goes into the ownership of the individual householders, and even though it's not their garden, it's still their responsibility individually to maintain that piece of land that they're given. That choice is for the developer. There is no issue with us putting what we call a landscape management condition on. We have done that in previous schemes for us to get told exactly how they're going to manage that area. I see no reason why that couldn't be a reasonable request if in the debate for this application. And I think that's probably as much as I need to say on that.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Matthiasson.
I'm not absolutely sure that what the classification of the settlement of Wickham Skeith is. It feels as if it's probably a hamlet or something. Or no, that's actually that's the JLP, isn't it? So I was interested in what the classification actually was.
It's countryside village.
Also, it's actually countryside. Okay.
Countryside village.
And can any officers or Councillor Warboys or somebody confirm page 244 that there are three permissions which are all live, which would contribute 8 dwellings towards the settlement? Is that right?
It's probably difficult for Councillor Warboys, I think. So, Mr. Pateman G, please, if you could answer that. Or Marcia, if you have that information.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. There are, yes, so we have recently approved 2 further dwellings to the south of the site. And I don't know the exact numbers of the applications. I know that the current site is subject to an approved outline and approved reserve matters. So is that something that you are referring to?
Yeah, so perhaps we can hear that a bit later on in the debate then, Chair.
Yeah, let's leave it to then, and let's see if it actually affects this plan that's in front of us. So if there are no other questions, we're going to move forward and we'll speak to the agent now, which is Sarah Roberts. Sarah, once you get going, you've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no robust reasons for refusal of the current proposal for this site. I'd like to ensure the members are clear about the planning policy affecting it. In the emerging joint local plan, the council voted to allocate this site for a minimum of 5 dwellings. For clarity, the emerging joint local plan pre-submission document states on page 44 that all identified home numbers are minimum figures. This approach to delivering a minimum number of dwellings is repeated across the entire emerging joint local plan document. The site has the benefit of a spade-ready planning permission for 2 large houses, which, if applied for now, would be against your own policy. If you choose to go against the officer's recommendation and against the positive pre-application advice your officer gave us, you will be voting against your own joint local plan allocation, our pre-application advice and your officer's assessment of the current proposal. We've followed all the protocols set out by yourselves as council members, and a rejection of this scheme based upon objections by the parish council representatives and presented by the ward member would, in my view, set a damaging precedent in terms of faith in your own systems. As stated in your officer's presentation, the scheme received support from all professional consultees in terms of density, landscape improvements and screening, highways and environmental health. In addition, we've received 3 letters from local families who are keen for the provision of smaller houses in Wickham Skeith. There are extant permissions for a total of 6 large houses on 3 separate sites along this section of Grange Road. 2 are already underway. What is being proposed here are 6 considerably smaller and more affordable semi-detached properties. This would balance the provision to a mix of dwellings which should be more acceptable to you, both in policy and in socio-economic terms. We fail to understand why the parish representatives prefer two more 5-bedroom houses over a new supply of 2 to 3 bedroom properties, which is 1 dwelling over the minimum you have specified should be on this site. I engaged with the parish council at a meeting, and I understand the planning officer discussed with the district member the justification for this call into committee. In my view, this application should not have been referred to the committee, as it satisfies your own policies far more than the extant permission and constitutes no planning harm within Wickham Skeith. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent timing. Questions, please, starting with Councillor Passmore.
Thanks, Barry. I'd just like to ask the agent, if we look at the plan on page 278, this is a detail, but one of the things I've always been concerned about since coming back on this committee is making sure that driveways are as porous as possible and we minimise the level of paving. I just wondered, if you look at the map, the plan, there's quite a lot of paved area. Would you be prepared to compromise on that should it be given the go-ahead? In other words, I'm not saying no paving at all, but unless I'm completely wrong, the hatched area on this plan, there's quite a lot of paved area, and I think it would be better if it was permeable, because looking at the water and driest part of the country, as many of my colleagues will know, some of it's shingle, but actually, John, if you look at the other parts that go up to the houses, I just wondered if there's a bit of compromise that would not affect the plans particularly, and there are all sorts of surfaces you can have, and I think if that's something we wish to do as a planning authority, I just wondered if you could clarify your position on that, should it get given the go-ahead. Thank you.
Yes, what we show is a shingle shared driveway, and then it's indicated as paving in the private driveways. The paving in the private driveways, there has to be a disabled, a wheelchair usable hard surface from one space to the access to the dwelling. So, the even paving now can be permeable. So yeah, we'd be very happy to have permeable paving specified.
Thank you. Councillor Eburn and Councillor Mansell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. This sort of raised a question to me on policy, if I can ask John Pateman-G, because I'm just a bit concerned about we've got the draft joint local plan, but I understood we were giving little weight to that. And if this is a countryside location, I'm concerned about which policy takes preference, as it were. Is it the countryside, because it's building in the countryside outside settlement boundary, or is it the emerging joint local plan? Just so I'm clear. Thank you.
I thought for a minute it failed, wasn't going to let me say anything. I thought that was a great start. Sorry. Right, okay. Yeah, this is not going to be straightforward or simple to explain. Okay. So let's start from the very beginning. We have our development plan, which is the local plan, and we have the core strategy. And in that policy context, in terms of those important policies, you have got a countryside village, and this is outside of even that. This is in the countryside. But you also have other material considerations. One of those material considerations is your emerging joint local plan. And that joint local plan, a few months ago, we would have said had limited weight on the basis that you have got a settlement boundary that now encompasses this site, and you have an allocation of 5 houses that encompasses this site. So you need to give what weight you wish to give to that material consideration. At the same time, we then have the position where that examination has stalled for the time being, and they're in the middle of working out a way forward in terms of turning the current joint local plan into a Part 1 and a Part 2 document. But even if that has stalled, members should perhaps be mindful that the evidence base behind the allocation has essentially said this is looking like a sustainable place for development to go. So you've got to bear that as in your weighting as well. That's the policy context, if you like, of where we are. But of course, we also have the NPPF and the tilted balance context to consider as well. So we're weighing up what are the important policies in regard to this development, but we also have to weigh up a number of factors within the NPPF. Now, housing supply is one element of that, and I know that may be a feature of other applications coming forward today. In Mid-Suffolk, we have more than 5 years, so there's not an automatic, we have out-of-date policies due to that particular aspect. But we also have to consider how our policies conform to the NPPF, which is another part of the test in the NPPF. And in this case, we would say that not all of our important policies for housing supply conform entirely with the NPPF as it stands, and that is why we have to look at the tilted balance to say that can we grant planning permission unless there is any demonstrable adverse harm for granting the application. So in a nutshell, it's not straightforward because there is a lot of factors and you have to go through a whole process from looking at what the most important policies are all the way through to where we are. There is a third element to this, which I know applies in another case later, which is where within the NPPF, whether the tilted balance is a part of it or not, the tilted balance disengages due to something in regard to heritage assets or flooding. Now, neither of those apply in this case, so the tilted balance does apply here, but you know, it's a very complicated sort of path you have to follow, and you have to keep changing different places and in different parts of the junction. In the end, you have to decide whether you consider this to be a sustainable location for development and whether this development causes harm in that context.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask the agent how these new dwellings are intended to be heated.
Air source heat pumps.
Are there any other questions for the agent? Councillor Matthiasson.
Yeah, I think the comments from Mr. Payman-G actually feed into the question really. I think it's conceded that this location of Wickham Skeith has pretty limited sustainability in terms of its services, and I wondered whether, in the light of the negative sustainability point that's highlighted there, whether you're prepared to go beyond building regs levels of sustainable design to balance that out.
Sarah, any points? Any answer to that?
Oh, was that to me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, it was.
Right. Nowadays, maybe I can't speak for all developers. The small developers that we work with in the area are very aware of the attractiveness of high levels of sustainable construction, and particularly this week, if properties are going to have low energy consumption for heating, then everybody's got to move in that direction. I mean, we're all going round. Well, I certainly was last night, going round readjusting my heating controls so that they're only on half as much as they were, for obvious reasons. So if we can build houses which are have all sorts of carefully thought out, sustainable features, then yes, we would do that. I'm not entirely sure how that fits into an actual planning condition. I'd be pleased to hear how that, if and how that can be conditioned.
We might leave that to debate then, and I think you're right. It's a bit of a difficult question to answer, to be honest with you. So we'll leave it to debate, and we'll come back to it. I'm sure, John.
Well, can we get the agents' participation at that stage?
I'll jump in with Mr. Ian DePrez.
Just to say, obviously, stating the obvious, this lady's an agent. She can't make a promise without her client's instructions as well, I think is
And Mr. Payman-G.
Okay, I'm going to be blunt to a certain point. We have to determine what's before us, and ultimately, the position you need to debate, if you go into debate, is if you are going to impose conditions to seek higher insulation and other matters that you may wish to discuss, you will need to decide whether they are reasonable and relevant and necessary in the context of this development and your current policy position. And obviously I can advise you on that as need be at that time.
Councillor Field.
I was just going to make the comment, or ask the question perhaps, that says presumably these houses will conform to the new building regs upgrade in, is it June or July? I'm not quite sure, which does shift the goalposts not quite as far as we'd like, but certainly in the right direction.
On that one, we're getting a nod from the agent. You'd like to confirm that, please?
Yes, as I understand it, the building regulations changed this summer, and after, if any submission which is made after that, any commencement of any individual house on the, even if a submission is made before the changes in June, any individual house which is started after that would comply with the new regulations. So yes, there's nothing's going to be starting on site before June, unless we're forced to build the 2 5-bedroom houses, which would need to start before April. But yes, absolutely, all the houses would comply with the new building regulations.
Thank you. Any more questions to the agent, please? Okay, in that case, we're going to move on to the ward member. Thank you for your time, Sarah. We're going to move on to the ward member now, which is Councillor Warboys.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My reasons for asking this to be considered are on pages 270 to 271. Alkaline planning permission for this site was given in November 2019, and the officer's comments at the time were, this application seeks to erect 2 dwellings. The sustainability of the development has been taken into account when considering this proposal, and it is not considered that the proposal conflicts with the NPPF to such an extent that would justify refusal of the application. The site's on the edge of the hamlet, in open countryside, and at the time not meeting any declared local housing needs. Pages 244 to 245 summarise the Parish Council's continued opposition to development on this site. This site was not identified for development at all in the joint local plan from July 2019. It does appear in the new online version as LSO1, with a land availability assessment for 5 dwellings. So, at present, there is a fallback position for 2 large houses with 5 bedrooms and a double garage each. The houses would each be on a generous plot, and there exist detailed layout plans showing how cars can enter and turn with each plot. This new application is for 6 semi-detached houses, 16 bedrooms in total, and parking for 16 cars. It is proposed that in front of the houses there is to be a shared access incorporating an 8 metres by 8 metres turning area. There is no detailed management plan for shared areas, which presumably includes the entire road frontage. It is claimed that the design takes into account orientation. However, this is inaccurate. The building ridges are oriented north-south, making any potential UV generation unviable. Your choice is then between 2 big or 6 larger dwellings. Does this proposal represent better design? There are questions already regarding sustainability, and this proposal, being larger, is surely less sustainable than the previous application. It is also about how much weight to give to a previous permission for a smaller development. What has deeply concerned the Parish Council is this final turn of the screw, where a developer who has permission for a smaller development comes back with an inflated development and expects the previous decision to set the precedent for further development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions for the ward member, please? Councillor Fields, that question. Thank you.
Just briefly, we frequently hear parish councils requesting smaller houses that match the local need. Is it that Wickham Seas don't see it that way, that they would prefer larger dwellings, which bias the available housing to somewhat more wealthy clients?
That hasn't been factored in the discussions at the parish council. The largest concerns are with the increase of traffic in the village, the preservation and continued conservation of the hedgerow, the problems with the existing problems with drainage on the road in front of this development. The questions of housing needs hasn't arisen at all in the parish council, and this development isn't seen as actually sort of meeting any existing housing needs.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for the ward member? Okay, in that case, we're going to move straight to debate. So who wants to start? Don't be shy. Councillor Passmore.
Right, thank you very much, Chairman. Well, having listened to a lot of the discussions, I have to say I actually rather like this development. I completely understand the issue about concerns there may be with overdevelopment, but I have to say, living in the next door village, I do know quite a lot of people that would be very, very pleased to see a similar development as such as this with the smaller houses and so on. And we do need, as I've said many, many times, helping people to get into property, smaller houses. Not everybody wants a large house. And I think, knowing the road here, it's actually, the semi-detached house I think is very appropriate. Obviously there's already outline planning permission on the site for a different level of housing anyway, but the houses opposite, from what I remember, of course, are also semi-detached anyway, and I think there's a lot of thought gone into this, and it does fit with the general demand, I think, within the area, and I think, therefore, I would like to formally propose approval, but there are a couple of conditions I would like to note down. One of them is about the permeability of the paved areas, if everything possible can be done to make sure they are porous, notwithstanding I was very pleased to hear about disabled access, which I completely understand. Clearly there are some concerns locally regarding hedgerow management, trees and so on. Can we make sure, please, there's a robust condition on that, that it is a really, really good landscaping scheme, and I think the application, by the way, does respect biodiversity. Very pleased to see the details there. As regards sustainability, well, we haven't got time to discuss sustainability this morning because we could be here for a whole week deciding on what sustainability actually is. The issue here, though, if we're looking at energy sources and knowing the terrible price rises there are, and probably more to come, it sounds to me, though this has inadvertently already been taken into account by using heat source pumps and so on. So for me, in my opinion, I do think it deals with that. And looking at this application on its own merits, what we have before us, I think there's been a lot of thought going into that. I actually don't think the development, this is going to really, really make a huge difference to the traffic. Clearly there will be more traffic, but at the current rate of progress, you're going to need a mortgage to fill up your car and use it anyway. So therefore, Chairman, I would like to move approval with those couple of extra conditions, please. Thank you.
Councillor Passmore, thank you for the proposal. I do need a seconder for that proposal before we move forward. Anyone? No. In that case, I'd like to second that proposal with the condition that you've applied. We'll now move back to debate. Initially, I've got Councillor Mansell.
Thank you, Chair. Given that we have the starting position in this site of having 2 5-bedroomed houses already got permission, and as the agent said, that's spade ready and they'd be starting to build them whenever, if they didn't get planning permission for the 3 pairs of semis for this new scheme. I think if we get the right conditions on this, we will actually end up with more environmentally sustainable homes because they'll be starting after June, or they'll match the new building regs. I too often harp on about smaller dwellings, and I think that having 6 modest-sized dwellings in Gislingham is probably better than having two large executive homes with huge gardens that will be out of the price range of your average family who might want to live in Gislingham. I'm not particularly familiar with Gislingham. It's a small village. I have been through it, but Wickham, sorry, not Gislingham. Well, Wickham Skeith. I have been through it. It's a small place, and often small villages end up with an ageing population because they're all big houses with couples in who can afford such large dwellings. So I actually far prefer the 6 modest dwellings on this plot. I'd like a little bit of clarification about exactly what conditions Councillor Passmore said. I certainly think we need a very strongly worded protection of the hedgerow fronting the road. He talked about landscaping and permeable driveways. I wasn't quite sure if he was suggesting that we also condition some sort of landscape management plan for the sort of semi-shared area, whatever it's called. I certainly think that we need to put something in to make sure that that area is maintained and managed properly, and I'm not sure if that was quite on Councillor Passmore's proposal, so I'd like a bit of clarification for that. But I think I prefer this to the 2 big houses. It's not ideal, but we've got that as a starting position.
Councillor Mann, thank you. So picking up on that, and Councillor Passmore, if you agree, we're looking for a condition to protect that hedgerow from any further damage, and also landscape management scheme condition as well. Mr. Pateman-G, before we come back to you, Tim.
It doesn't actually say hedge, but the conditions in your papers on page 253, you have the landscaping scheme to be implemented as the approved plans, and obviously the approved plans show the retention of the hedge as part of that, but you also have an additional condition that says protective tree fencing specifications to be agreed. Tree, we tend to stretch that to tree and hedge, but the word hedge can be put in there.
Councillor Passmore, thank you. So now we're going to move along. We've got Councillor Matthiasson first.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the parish council is wishing that this site was not developed. Unfortunately, that's no longer an option that's available to us. I mean, I think as a countryside village, our policies would suggest a handful of extra dwellings every few years to match expanding need, and we haven't actually stacked it up exactly, but they're getting 8 already, which other things, if we hadn't already got the 2 5-bedroom ones, then I would say, well, look, a countryside village, they've got enough on their way, they don't really need some more. But given a choice between what's got permission and this, then it's difficult to to say that we should refuse it, really. I mean, it's a pity, but it's where we are with this site at the moment, unfortunately. And certainly it's good to hear that we will get the new upcoming sustainable design standards. So I can't quite refuse it, sympathising with the parish council as I do.
Thank you. Moving to Councillor Mayor, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think the increased number of houses is a good thing. So I do believe this is a better development. I do have to take issue with Councillor about sustainability. As I understand it, this is a full application, and therefore design is an issue that comes into question. Designing houses when we have a climate change emergency that orientate north-south seems to me to be a complete failure. If you look over the road, the house is built 1970s, largely north-south, but some of those roofs have an east-west orientation. So in my mind, this is a step forward. It's better than 5 bedroom houses, but if you'd given a crayon to a 10-year-old and tried to draw him a house, he'd have drawn boxes, just like these boxes. And with a bit of luck, he might have got the orientation right. I'm sorry, but I don't see that the design of these houses is fit for the 21st century because the orientation is wrong. So, whilst I see it as a better, you know, the increased number of houses is better than 5, I'm not going to support this.
Thank you. Moving on to Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. If this was a blank piece of paper application, you know, coming forward without any history, you know, I'd have had serious issues with it, you know, on sustainability, on being in the countryside. You know, I don't think we should go against our own policies. However, if we were to refuse this one today, then obviously we would have 2 houses built there anyway. And I would prefer to see smaller houses built full stop, whether they're in small villages or towns, because I feel that's what we need. I do have issues about the sustainability of it per se, both the design, as Councillor Mayer has mentioned, and the fact that in terms of once you step outside the hedge, as it were, there's no footpath, there's no you know, ease of access for walking, and I think that is a real shame. I would like to see, again, the protection, if this is approved, for the hedgerow. My concern would be that over time these houses might decide they each want their own access onto the road, and we need to prevent that and keep that area looking countryside, as it were. So I'm slightly on the fence about this at the moment, but given that if we don't, if this isn't approved, we're likely to have 2 large houses anyway. I think I'd be, on balance, more in favour than not. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And we're going to move on to Councillor Field, please.
Thank you. Well, I think I'm largely in favour of this development. I mean, the MPPF does allow development in the countryside as long as it's not isolated, and I can't see that this is isolated, not with houses immediately opposite and quite close to the village boundary, although not adjacent to it. It is, as been pointed out, in our emerging local plan that has arisen from a reasonably sensible process. I do feel that switching 2 large houses from 6 smaller ones matches local need better, or most villages will believe it meets local need, and particularly as we're told there are other large houses being developed in the village. So there is a spread in size matching the spread of needs of the population. Is it sustainable? Well, it's clearly within 2 miles of a larger village with plenty of facilities. 2 miles nowadays is a long walk, but not impossible on your bicycle. So I'm inclined to think this is more sustainable than some locations. I'm pleased to see that we'll be meeting the June building regs, which moves some way towards our requirements on improved environmental performance. It would be nice if one could mount solar arrays on the roof if they were the right way round. It may be that solar arrays are so cheap nowadays that it could be done even on not optimally orientated roofs. I definitely believe we should condition not only the sort of construction of the open space, the landscaping, but the ongoing maintenance of that. It's probably a sensible thing to do, but just make sure that that does get done and does get continued onwards. And I think that about finishes what I want to say. Basically agree with most other things that have been said. Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead, please.
Thank you. I found myself very finely balanced on this, although I have a lot of sympathy with the words said by Councillor Mayer. I mean, looking back at the plans for the 2 large houses that are already approved, from what I can see there, both the roofs of the houses and indeed the garages are orientated so that they could effectively be plastered with solar panels, which would then supply power to the air source heating for hot water, and indeed for electric vehicles. So in some ways, to me, those two large houses seem much more sustainable than this new proposal. I'm also a bit disappointing that the member referral form has that error where it says the development is within the conservation area. So it seems a shame to me that it couldn't have got through the editing process to have that corrected. That's my thoughts at the moment.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Matthiasson.
Yeah, I think that Councillor Mayer does bring us back to a very important point about the orientation. And I mean, ideally, I'd like to see the sustainability officers commenting on every application. And I think if they were commenting on this one, they would say what Councillor Mayer has just said. And it does seem to me that if the agent took away the thought that this committee is comfortable with the 6 smaller properties on this site, and that recognising that the need to achieve, I think it's 19% improvement that the building regs are going to bring us, that really taking it away and actually getting the right orientation. There is quite a big site here. It should be within the width of the architect to get the thing oriented correctly, and get a significant contribution to the power for the air source heat pumps. So I think that I'd like to just leave that thought with the agent, that might be a better way of going forward, that there wouldn't be a need to bring it back to committee if the design was just changed, given that we've accepted the principle up to and including 6 properties already. So that's just an additional thought. It doesn't mean I'm going to change my view that on balance I would support. But while I'm at it, I would just like to say on the conditions, whether, and I'm sure he has previously agreed with this, Councillor Passmore would accept that that house martins need a home as well as the swifts, and that indeed we should remember the hedgehog highways also in that condition. So with those thoughts,
Councillor Passmore.
I'm always delighted to approve anything that would help biodiversity, such as hedgehog huts and obviously house martin cups. They're cups. No, I mean, I think hopefully in time that will become part of our policy anyway, so then we wouldn't have to debate it further. But no, I do agree with that, absolutely.
Mr Popeman G, please.
Well, I've got to admit, looking at the block plan, it does actually mention hedgehogs, and it mentions a beehive on the block plan as well as swift boxes and bat boxes. In terms of the conditions recommended to you, we've slightly gone a bit weird here, I'll be perfectly honest. We've got swift boxes to be installed as agreed, but we've also then got biodiversity enhancements to be agreed prior to occupation. I would probably say biodiversity enhancements is a bit of a cover-all and would cover all of that, so the necessity of the swift boxes as well isn't needed because we'd deal with it all in one condition there. But I think we've got that covered quite sufficiently in terms of the recommendation.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Debates. Any other points? Councillor Mansell.
Well, I just wanted to say, before we go to the vote, can we have the additional conditions read out clearly so we know what we're voting for? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Mr Popeman, do you need a bit of time, or are you good to go?
Well, in terms of, it is as recommended, my words today, apologies. It is as your recommendation. When it was recommended and seconded, we had landscape management plan to be agreed, which would be to deal with that front area mostly. We had paving to be permeable. I heard 2 extras later, but I don't know if they were included, which was a change to the protective tree fencing to include hedges, for the point of clarification. There was something else, but I've forgotten what it was. Was there any others? No, that's already covered. I think that might be it.
Yeah, landscape management scheme condition.
I have one further condition I'd like to now recommend. Just having looked at the block plan one last time, There is an existing access to the south-east corner of the site, which has got a field gate on it. And I just looked through the highway conditions, and there's no highway conditions to stop up the existing access. So I would like to add a condition to stop that access up. I would also note that as a classified road, any further accesses in the future, if anyone moves in and decides they want to try and create the access of their own, would still need planning permission in any event, because this is a classified road. So that doesn't need a condition because it's already covered by the need of planning permission.
Thank you. Any other points? I've got a couple. Obviously, I support this. I support it for a number of reasons. One, I think it's the right place for this development. I think that 6 houses that are affordable fits the need of the rural areas rather than 2 large, expensive houses. As far as vehicles go, that's arguable as to whether there's more or less vehicles. A 2-bedroom house doesn't have 3 cars generally, and a 3-bedroom house doesn't necessarily have 3 cars either. So it's a bit of a, yeah, it's a guess, isn't it? So I don't think there's a massive difference. I'll come on to the solar panels. I think your point is absolutely relevant, Councillor May, and the fact that it seems to me that a lot of the proposals we get in front of us don't consider orientation, and they should, and maybe that's a point for the future. But I've just been on to, because I know these things, I know that obviously the prime is facing south, about 30 degrees angle, that'll give you about 100%. And I've just checked my figures, and on one of the sites that I've looked at, the ecohomeessentials.co.uk, great reading, that sort of backs that up. But it also says that if I'm east or west, I still do get some benefit from the sun, from the rising sun and the failing sun. It's just not as good. And it drops from, say, 100% down to about 86%. But that's variable, dependent on the orientation, as in elevation of the panels. So it doesn't mean you're not getting anything, okay? So we need to balance that out a little bit. It's not as good as it should be, though. And that's a really important point. I agree with you completely. But wouldn't it be terrible if all houses faced north-south? We'd just have loads of terrace houses in the countryside, wouldn't we? You know, there's a double-edged sword, really. But it is an important point. I am supporting this. And if there are no other points, I'd like to move this to the vote, please. But first of all, can we just confirm these conditions?
So the conditions is to approve, as recommended by officers in your papers, with the additional conditions, those being landscape management plan to be agreed, paving to be permeable in the areas to be agreed, protective fencing for tree and hedges, and the stopping off of an existing access to the south-east corner.
Everybody clear on that? Okay, thank you. In that case, I will ask the governance officer to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress in your app. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 7 votes for and 1 against.
Thank you. Carried. Let's gather my notes and then we'll move on to the next agenda point. We're now going back to 8A, and I'll ask the Area Planning Manager, John Pateman G, to introduce the application to the committee, which is land east of Warren Lane and west of Cresmeadow Way, Elmswell, Suffolk. John. Happy for 5 minutes, comfort break, so back in 5 minutes, please. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you're suitably refreshed. We're now going to move on with the agenda 8A. John Payman G, please.
Thank you. So this is the application for the outline planning permission, access to be considered, but all other matters reserved, for the erection of 44 dwellings, including bungalows, affordable housing, open space, landscaping and associated infrastructure. This application was presented to committee on the 8th of December and resolved to defer in order to seek further information on the impact of the quarry to the south of Elmswell. So just to recap, this is the site, so it's the south of Elmswell. It's enclosed on a number of sides by existing development and infrastructure. It is outside the current settlement boundary, so it's just down there. And it has an allocation in the joint local plan of limited weight for 38 dwellings. It also had a previous planning application for 38 dwellings on part of the site as well. And of course that has expired last year. Just closing up, just looking at the aerial photographs, so the top half of the site is surrounded by essentially the settlement boundary and also development on all four sides. Moving down to the bottom half, development is to the north, south and east. Start again, north, east and west. To the south it's open to the open countryside. And you've got Warren Lane to the left there that goes off to the south towards Lawn Farm, Industrial Business Park and other road networks. That's the settlement boundary as it stands in your current local plan. There are no actual constraints as such for the site itself. Nothing's moving, try again, there you go. We have very detailed indicative layouts showing how the plots would all work. We have a number of shallow sustainable drainage systems proposed with this scheme, which is mainly to the north and running along the eastern edge. And just going into close up to see how that development would fit in within the existing development. Okay. So we have an indicative mix, which we find acceptable, and we have, like I say, fairly detailed understanding of how the sustainable drainage would work in this location to ensure that it is a shallow system. And just turning to photographs now. These are various shots taken from parts of the site as indicated. And as you can see, the most exposed point is coming from the south towards the village sitting in the background, but you will see this development as you approach along that Warren Lane. Taking it further afield, you can see the village is on a ridge essentially, as you see it from distance. And if you go all the way around to the eastern side of Elmswell and look back, you can just about see perhaps that northern part, which is essentially surrounded by existing development, although the southern part is sat behind the trees. This is an older shot, I will say. And then just to clarify, this is the southern part of the site, looking from the development on the opposite side of the road, out to the southern views. And just looking back. And then we are inside the more northern part of the site, in that sort of green open space at the moment, which is surrounded by existing development. And we have a footpath that always looks like the beak of the layout. We have a footpath that goes off in one corner as well. So the reason we deferred it last time was to look at the quarry matter further. And this has been detailed in full in your reports, but there are safeguarding zones for consultation, and this includes part of the site. So just to clarify, this is the site is roughly in here, and this is the quarry that we're mainly referring to with its safeguarding zone. To pull that into close, looking at it closely, this has been provided by Suffolk County Council, and the question here is it's not just the existing safeguarding zone of the quarry as it stands, but there are expansion plans indicated here in the red, and of course that expands that safeguarding zone as well. And it's the expanded safeguarding zone that covers a part of the site before us. Just to clarify, and of course this is an indicative plan, that's roughly, and this is my drawing in terms of putting the blue line on, so there is a degree of error, please bear that in mind. But essentially that is roughly where that safeguarding zone will be. I will say though that if you take the scale of the safeguarding zone at one scale and try to take it all the way down to a different scale, the thickness of a line can get very wide. So it is a judgment here. Just to clarify where the expansion area is proposed in terms of the current quarry for extraction purposes there. Right. As recorded in your papers, we have discussed the application with the Suffolk County Council. The conclusion being that the county, as the Minerals Authority, consider that the proposed housing development will not be prejudicial to the operations of the quarry. It will be for the future application for the expansion, which hasn't come in yet, to expand the quarry, if and when, to consider the existing amenity of existing residents. So that's those right now in terms of Elmswell, and any that are obviously approved in the meantime if this was approved. Your officers note that the expansion will be an extraction area. The main noise will consider to the southeast corner of that site, and the development would most likely continue the 3 to 5 metre high bund around the quarry that's there in part at the moment. We also, as officers, note the distance and the woodland as well. In conclusion, the site is not within the current safeguarding zone, but will partly be within the future expanded zone, as we have shown. But our conclusions is there isn't an issue here at this time for us to seek refusal on that basis. Further to the last committee, we have also had further discussions with the county on the obligations sought in respect of this application, education, the cycle link between Elmswell and Woolpit, and we have received further justification in respect of those obligations. So we have altered the recommendation from last time to now include all obligations sought by the county and the district as detailed in your papers. So there is no reduced obligation requirement. We are seeking everything that the county have asked for. Therefore, in conclusion, this is considered to be a much improved application in terms of space, sustainable drainage compared to the previous scheme for 38, but now includes all of the obligations and contributions that neither the previous scheme or the allocation itself within our joint local plan they don't include those. It is noted in another application on the agenda, we have given very limited weight to the planning history, whereas in this case we have given it some weight. These are very different sites. The scale of development is different, especially in terms of 44 versus a far smaller site. But especially in terms of the provisions of the NPPF and paragraph 11D, the main difference being the context of heritage harm that applies to that site but does not apply to this site, and therefore heritage harm does not disengage the tilted balance in this case. The tilted balance applies in this case. There are also differences in terms of housing supply, as we know, but also the assessment of the suitability of the location. This is a very sustainable village compared to the other site. let me just catch up, sorry. So the conclusion being that we have considered the overall benefit of the additional land. It is more than what is in the allocation or the previous scheme, but we consider that the scheme demonstrates high level of potential design, layout, without harm to amenity. The scheme includes wider improvements to the area, and in terms of the tilted balance, to grant permission unless any adverse impact of doing so would significantly and demonstratively outweigh the benefits, approval is recommended. Thank you.
Thank you. And members, do you have any questions? Councillor Eburn.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, with regards to the quarry, I understand there are complaints about noise and dust from the quarries. Do you know how many there are from the neighbouring estate, such as Crest Meadow Way? Thank you.
No, I don't. The county didn't provide anything in that respect.
Councillor Matthiasson.
There's one or two of them actually. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything from the sustainability officer again on this one. This one clearly it isn't less than 10, and so I wondered what happened about that. And I think the other question is, where's it gone? See, not of it. Yeah, really, yes. In your conclusions, page 52, could you say really why does the conclusion seem to compare this application with the lapsed application rather than comparing it with the status quo?
The first question was in terms of the sustainability officer. They were consulted. I don't have a reply recorded. They were consulted a couple of times throughout the life of the application. So in terms of why we compared to the previous scheme, this has been ongoing for some time. The previous scheme only expired last year, but at the same time, up until Christmas, the site is also allocated for 38 houses within your emerging joint local plan. So we also have the evidence documents behind that allocation to say that 38 is deemed to be considered acceptable in principle in this location. So for the majority of the site, and we'd appreciate it doesn't cover the entire site, but for the majority of the site, we have a clear steer in terms of your policy position, and we have a clear steer in terms of previous history, which we have given weight in this case. I apologise if it comes across slightly biased towards the history, but it is an important factor as considering the evolution of how this site got to be allocated. It was part of that consideration, and therefore we considered it to be given weight in this context. But you are right, you also need to give context to all other material considerations, and that includes the current local plan and the position of that. You also have land here that is in addition to what has been accepted in the past, with the additional of just 6 houses. But of course we've also had to weigh that in the balance to say that allowing the site to expand in area of land allows us better opportunity to have a far lower density that would be more in keeping with the rural edge than we felt that the 38 approved before would be, and ultimately allows enough space for a far greater degree of landscaping and sustainable drainage area to have a shallow system than the previous scheme would have allowed for. So in the balance, they are the conclusions, and it is a complicated judgment to make because you're giving weight to different things in different ways.
Thank you.
Councillor Field, please.
Thank you. I was looking at page 47, paras 39, 310, your analysis of policies of ours that are inconsistent with the MPPF and policies which are consistent, and therefore the weight that should be applied. And in 311, you say, based on the assessment above, given the inconsistent policies important to the application, the tilted balance is considered to engage. Right. And then you go on to look at 11D, 1 and 2. I notice the next application we look at after this seems to have a completely, or to my mind, completely different set of policies analysed as being consistent and being inconsistent. So while I understand your issue that perhaps part of 11D2 would disengage a tilted balance, I can't see why the two analyses are not consistent.
I have a correction to make to the next application, which is relevant to that. So I can't really deal with that here, but I need to deal with it when we get to that next application. Ultimately, the other point is that it's not just policy, it's how you apply weight to those policies in the context of the location of the application. So the location of this application is adjacent to one of the more sustainable locations we have in the district, as opposed to another application that's literally next to a few houses in the middle of nowhere. And you can't apply those policies the same way in its judgment, in its conformity with the NPPF. So there is differences there. There's a professional difference perhaps as well that does come into it. You know, I will give you an officer's, we try to be as consistent as possible with each other, but I appreciate there may be a few inconsistencies there. I've taken my analysis of what is consistent or inconsistent in terms of the NPPF from the appeal history that I feel was relevant to this case, and I've mainly looked around on the Woolpit appeal, which is one of the more substantial appeals that we've ever had in this district, where the inspector did take us to task over the policies that we were using and how they were relevant to the NPPF. I don't believe I've gone beyond that, but I'd be, I'm more happy, well, that might be a separate discussion, but I'm happy with the assessment I've given you for the purposes of this application in this location.
Thank you. I mean, obviously my concern is that as a councillor I'm being given consistent advice from you guys as professionals, and I notice the differences as I read through these various papers, and your explanation that depends on the location. You know, a third party might assume it depends on whether we want to approve or not approve the application, so I'm concerned about that possible view that people could take.
So the most important policies in the context of putting a housing development next to a sustainable centre versus what are the important policies putting a development in the countryside. But of course in the case we've just had, they're very different. But ultimately the other material weight given in that case was to the planning history and the previous approval of two houses. So you are trying to balance these aspects, and they inform how you imply what policies and how much weight you give to those policies as well. The important thing between this application and Alex's application later is how the tilted balance engages in respect of the heritage position. And there are very different criteria within the NPPF because of that. So our path splits apart quite significantly at that point in terms of what we feel was relevant policies that have been applied to this site. I take your point, it's something maybe we need to look at further to find a better way to summarise this within our reporting to you.
Councillor Eburn, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to be clear on the evidence that's in the SHELAR for the drafting of the draft joint local plan, which is on hold, that only covered part of the site. So there isn't any evidence covering the site that extends well beyond the southern line of the housing, the southern housing line in the village. So can I just be clear that we haven't got any evidence covering that southern part of the site that extends out where the tree band is beyond the south of the site? Thank you, Chair.
No, you're quite right. I'm trying to be helpful. I have on page 44 included, I tried to do it as a comparison table, but the allocation in the joint local plan, do you know, there's even a story behind that. It gets complicated. But essentially, the allocation in terms of a map is that there's actually the text allocation refers to the entirety of the site at one point, which includes the extra land that we're talking about here. So there has been a journey, but I think I would be safe in saying that what we're looking at in terms of the limited weight joint local plan position is as shown on page 44 there.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. We're going to move on then to the Parish Council, Peter Dow from Elmswell Parish Council. Peter, you have 3 minutes from the moment you start your chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I fear that common sense is likely to go out the window here. We must instead frame our very firm objections with reference to NPPF, where we are asked to weigh the benefits against the adverse impact. I always think that the tilting balance is quite often, from our point of view, tilting at windmills, but never mind. For the community, the benefits are indiscernible. With 190 houses just finished at the bacon factory, the first of 60 occupied this month at Borley Crescent, a healthy chunk of the 240 at Weatherden Road completed, 106 well underway at Ashfield Road, and hot off the press, 86 at School Road. For those keeping up, we're at 680 plus, and could throw in 19 at Oak Lane, 6 more at Ashfield Road, and suggest that in MPPF's words, the needs of the area are well met. The developer seductively offers Elmswell a range of benefits from their proposed delivery of much needed housing, this on top of the 700 I just listed. They've tried hard to make a case. Their proposal goes beyond what we were braced for, i.e. development within our settlement boundary on designated sites. We had accepted with poor grace the permission granted in 2018 for 38 houses. It took our village boundary to the limit of the development envelope. Beyond this is countryside, where wheat can be grown, now worth £300 a tonne, and you saw the crop in the officer's photographs. We're now asked to stomach an extension of that site, creeping towards the extremely troublesome poor neighbour, which is Lawn Farm Quarry. For an extra 6 houses, we are asked to allow the development boundary to be breached, clearly opening the door to further expansion to the east, linking up with this same developer's Weatherden Road site. We told our residents that the pressure would lessen when a 5-year housing supply was a shot in the locker against such predations. Here, we are asked to resile on this long-awaited chance to draw breath. The developer claims that the hard-fought housing supply figure counts for nothing, when, in his opinion, the structure which it seeks to underpin is out of date. Just as last time I was asked to address you on this application, I'm appealing for the common sense that I fear may be out the window. The developer has his houses, in effect, 38 of them within the boundary, fitting neatly into the development pattern. The village has enough houses, 738 and counting, to satisfy all reasonably anticipated demand. The extra 6 are to be built outside of the village, opening up a clear opportunity for further development. I would ask that we persuade the powers that be to revisit the 2018 permission, the clear steer to approval that your officer has indicated. If members decide that the benefits to Elmswell outweigh the incursion into our countryside and the threat this poses to our further environs, then we have to ask them to explain,
Peter, I need you to summarise now,
as a corollary to any such decision. I will print this in the newsletter, the Elmswell newsletter, and I invite any members who support this to give us their reasons in print.
Thank you. There's actually no need to do that, but thank you anyway. Members, do you have any questions, please? Councillor Matthiasson.
Yeah, the joint local plan, as you know, is described as emerging, and the neighbourhood plan process is dismissed at page 46 as does not have And I wondered if you could just tell us a little more to what extent it is emerging, because it seems to me that it's been in traction towards getting adopted for rather a long time, and if you could just help us a little bit understand what weight, if any, we ought to give that, particularly compared to the weight we'll attach to the joint local plan. Thank you.
If I could just jump in on that one. If we're talking about weight to be applied, we'll come back to Mr. Pateman-G for that answer. Thank you. Okay. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. The neighbourhood plan is now ready for pre-application deposit, and as I understand it, may actually have gone for pre-application deposit. It has taken an inordinately long time because, unfortunately, we were too keen, jumped too early, we didn't know what we were doing, and neither did Mid-Suffolk. We now do, so do you, so it's now ready for submission.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, and thank you for your time. Okay, we'll now move on. So we're now going to ask the agent, James Bailey, please. And again, you have 3 minutes. Start from the moment you start talking. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members. I'm James Bailey, and I'm the planning consultant that has been working on the current proposals on the land that sits between Warren Lane and Crestmeadow Way in Elmswell. Contrary to my normal style, I shall look to be brief this morning. We last met at the December committee, where the merits of the scheme were discussed. Concerns were raised regarding the nearby quarry expansion, and there were also some further obligations being requested by Suffolk County Council. I'm pleased to report that both of these items have now been successfully discussed, confirmed and agreed to the satisfaction of your officers. As I recall at the December committee, there appeared to be a general acceptance that the layout being presented before you now represents an improvement on the original consented scheme. On this basis, I would therefore respectfully request that members follow and endorse their officer's recommendation and approve this application this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, Councillor Eburn, do you have any questions, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. The original application went in 2016, along with the Weatherden Road applications for 240 homes. Why is it that you've suddenly come back with an increased size on this application and not gone ahead with building as you've done on the other sites? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we would probably all agree, or hopefully so, that the scheme that we're presenting now seems to make a lot more sense and use of the space. We've gone into a lot more detail in what is presented to you this morning, and obviously at December committee, than perhaps was presented previously. By that I mean in terms of the type of houses, the type of orientation in terms of the SUDS features, and also the landscaping. Perhaps that hadn't featured perhaps as heavily from 2016 onwards, but I think the difficulty was bringing forward the 38 units in that form. It may well have been that a reserved matters was going to come forward later on that perhaps would have had difficulty in providing that. What I think we've got now in front of us, albeit an additional 6 units, is something that works better in terms of its setting and in terms of its improvements and enhancements that it's looking to provide.
Councillor Eburn? Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. That's can I ask then why the SUDS features, and I understand obviously there's geology and geography to play, but why those type of features or open space or whatever isn't in the area that's south of the building line, whereas you've extended houses out into the southern part rather than leaving that as open space and SUDS and so forth? Thank you.
At the end of the day, the application process is one where we come in and we speak with the officers through a pre-application process involving others in terms of your fellow counterparts at the County Council, including the likes of landscaping and ecology and drainage. That is where we've had the discussion with your counterparts in terms of the drainage that we are looking to propose. As you quite rightly say, Councillor Eburn, there is a variety of different types of features that you can see on the scheme in front of you, some of which are larger sort of depressions, as it were, others of which are more sort of linear swales. What we've provided there is something that is sufficient to meet the number of houses that we're looking at now, in terms of landscaping and in terms of ecology and the biodiversity that it's providing as well. And that is why we've got a recommendation for an approval from the County Council Drainage Floods team.
Thank you. Councillor Field, please.
The question really is, will you be telling potential purchasers how close the quarry will be getting?
Absolutely, and I believe that they are probably already aware.
Any other questions from members? Okay, we're going to move on to, thank you for your time. We're going to move on to the ward members now. So it's Councillor. Sorry. Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand. Sorry.
So I was going to make a point about the drainage, but actually it was relatively covered. I will just say this. We had negotiations with the floods team at County. We met with them on occasion, and one of the conversations was about not just having a big giant hole at one end of the site and filling it, you know, with water and being very deep, which could have been the case here. What this scheme is spread out across the site in various different swales and a shallow system, which means that you effectively don't need the big attenuation basin right at the bottom of the site, hence why it's not there. You've got more landscaping there rather than a big hole in the ground. The idea behind this one was if you equalise it across the site, because the site in its geography allowed you to do that, you would lessen the impact, but actually of the subsystem itself, and actually have more opportunities for landscaping to be wound within the site itself. It was the approach that was taken on board, and it's more compliant with the up-to-date guidance that County now gives. Obviously, guidance back in 2016 versus the guidance of this year from the County has radically changed in respect of drainage, because they only really were just up and running at that point back 4 or 5 years ago.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to the ward members. So it's Councillor Sarah Mansell, followed by Councillor Helen Geek, I believe.
Thank you. The previous application for 38 dwellings has now expired, and although that decision is material, this application now needs to be determined on its own merits. Let's not forget that back in 2018, MSDC did not have its 5-year housing land supply. Now that we have over 9 years land supply, there is much less need for this contrived plot to be developed for housing at all. Elmswell is already being subjected to many large new housing developments, as already outlined by the parish clerk, and we still have no satisfactory or sustainable solutions to the traffic issues and the primary education facilities in the village. I've always considered that the access arrangements for this site are plainly daft. Warren Lane is a narrow road. It's always made much more sense to me to access this plot of land from Cresmeadow Way, where the pedestrian cycle access is now proposed. Warren Lane is already heavily used as a rat run for all but the largest lorries from the Lawn Farm Business Park, where both Bacton Transport and Scania East are now based. And there is the ever-expanding Stag Cafe metropolis, as well as other traffic coming off the A14 at junction 47A, where there is only one-way exit. The responses from the Suffolk County Council Minerals team didn't seem particularly clear in respect of any impact caused by the expansion of the quarry. They seem to cite that other developments have already begun within the impact zone, so what is a few more? The development site on Weatherden Road, which has several dwellings inside the expansion impact zone, was granted planning permission before the 2020 minerals plan came into being. And there is as yet no planning permission for the expansion of the quarry, and any impacts will then need to be taken into consideration when that permission is determined. But if the expansion of the quarry is already in the plan, surely this is a foregone conclusion, and there will be impacts on any new homes within this impact zone. And in response to Councillor Eburn's query about complaints from existing residents from the quarry, it's an ongoing, regular basis. Lots of complaints about noise, dust, size of the bund and dirt on the road. The future expanded primary school in Elmswell will still be insufficient for all the growth that's already planned, and Suffolk County Council don't seem to have a firm idea of what yet to do. Will they be building a new school in the north of Woolpit to cover the future expansion of both Woolpit and Elmswell, or will they expand the existing Woolpit primary school, or will they do both? Either way, some Elmswell children will need to be transported across the A14 for their primary education well before any new cycle or pedestrian route is completed. I note in the officer report it states that the density of this new development is less than what was in the previous application, but is this necessarily a good thing? The district and Elmswell as a village need smaller market dwellings. We don't necessarily want another load of large executive homes on large plots. And the indicative plan does show an appropriate mix. But the indicative mix of housing, both market dwellings and homes, could provide us with a good number of those much needed smaller properties, but only if there is a condition suggesting that the reserve matters is broadly in line with the indicative mix at outline stage. And you'll need to be clear on the indicative numbers, as I think there were some errors in the DNA. The written numbers don't tally with the drawing. It would also be good if more of these new homes could be oriented to make most of solar gain and were heated by renewables. Should this committee be minded to approve, I hope that you will consider these suggestions, as well as other conditions relating to the pedestrian access to the site. The footpath links from the site to both Warren Lane and Cresmeadow Way should be cycleways or shared access ways, not just footpaths. The most obvious route from these new homes to the existing primary school would be via Cresmeadow Way. Please also condition the proposed footpath link shown on the indicative plans to the south of the site to create a link to some permissive footpaths which would give access to the wider footpath network to the south of the village, much used by dog walkers and many others, particularly since the COVID lockdowns. I think we also need a condition relating to the proposed play area in the public open space provision, and also the indicative layout, including drainage basin, should be adhered to in any future reserve matters application. And don't forget, include as many environmental sustainability measures as you possibly can, because no doubt that will come back to haunt us at reserve matters stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Before going further, Mr. Popeman-G, please.
Just to mention that in the recommendation before members, condition 9 controls the market mix of dwellings to be agreed, including number of bedrooms and space standards, prior to or concurrent with reserve matters. So that is to be controlled. The other issues there will essentially fall under the theme of layout, which is not part of the outline before us and can be picked up at a reserve matter stage. So it's a balance of preloading or allowing reserve matters to be judged on its merits later. I would say you can cover those easily enough with reserve matters in respect of some of the layout issues referred to, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Before we lose any questions, because we're going to go to Councillor Geek in a moment, are there any questions for Councillor Mansell? Councillor Matthiasson.
I didn't. Which issues are that Councillor Mansell's just talked about are layout issues? I wasn't clear which, you know, it didn't see. I mean, footpath links are access anyway, and
well, not entirely. The footpath links within the site itself would be part of the layout. The so the linkage to the I forgot the name of the other road. Sorry. Yeah, so within the site, any linkages to that point could be part of the layout for consideration. I thought I had got it controlled. Bear with me. So we've got on-site management, open space, junction improvements to Warren Lane, improvement of Warren Lane itself, contribution to changing the speed limit. Here we go. The cycle pedestrian access to Cresmeadow Way and Warren Lane would be secured. That's in the 106 agreement, so that is there. So that's already approved ahead of any reserve matters. So that one I had to do as a 106 agreement because it's securing an actual linkage in terms of that. But the actual layout of the cycle path itself would be a matter for the reserve matters within the site.
Any other questions for Councillor Mansell? I have one. So you talked about the Warren Lane and the issues with Warren Lane. Although there are three conditions that are already within the proposal, would they satisfy your concerns or not?
No, they already had a scheme for putting passing places on Warren Lane several years ago, and there are a few sort of bits of wider road with a bit of curb on, but they're, I mean, as you saw in one of the photos, cars just drive up the verge, and the field is being worn away by the amount of traffic that is using that road. There is, I believe, as per the original 38, there was a lot of discussion about the junction with Warren Lane and Church Road, and that is secured the improvements. I presume they're the same as they were for the number 38, but it is a very sensitive road because of all the development at the Lawn Farm Quarry and the lorries. There is a weight limit, but the biggest trucks that can possibly still use it because of that one-way access at junction 47A. Anything coming out of Lawn Farm, if they want to go westbound on the A14, they are supposed to go all the way to Hawley and join the A14 there, and obviously that's quite a long detour. So they either nip through Elmswell and go along Warren Lane, but there's a weight limit there, or they nip down Wood Road, Woolpit, and nip through Woolpit. So it does generate a lot of traffic. So Warren Lane is much more heavily used than the size of the road shows, really. It's not designed for that amount of traffic.
Thank you. We'll move on now to Councillor Helen Geek.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by echoing and supporting the objections and points raised by Councillor Mansell and by Elmswell Parish Council. This extension to the south, beyond the allocated site in the draft joint local plan, makes this development not just slightly larger than the allocated area, but half as big again, virtually. And so it will encourage further sprawl into the countryside, not only towards that noisy, dusty quarry, but also, as the Parish Council have pointed out, towards the new estate at Weatherden Road to the east. In addition, the many objections that were received by the Council at the time of the previous expired application, the one for 38 dwellings, they seem to have been largely overlooked, although they're still relevant, if not more relevant, to this application. They come from Elmswell and Weatherden Parish Councils and from several residents in both parishes, and mainly refer to traffic considerations on Warren Lane. Since 2016, as Councillor Mansell has said, that now has to accommodate increased traffic resulting from the development of the Lawn Farm industrial estate and that ballooning site at the Stag Cafe. Those commercial developments don't have proper access to the A14. Those junctions do not work properly, particularly 47A. So traffic coming from these sites has to go either through Woolpit, past the primary school and the health centre, or through Hawley New Street and Weatherden, or if they take the shortest route, of course, they go up Warren Lane, turning left at the accident black spot of Nuisance Corner and down through the School Road junction in Elmswell. You must be horribly familiar with the School Road junction in Elmswell by now. The County Highways team appear only to have considered the immediate effects on Warren Lane, but as we all know, once you've got into your car, you're unlikely only to go as far as the next road. We need to think about the wider area. Lastly, of course, approving yet another small increase to the population of the village means that the decision to approve the current school extension looks ever more like an expensive short-term sticking plaster. Yes, how about the conditions if you are minded to approve this development? There's a condition that an energy scheme be approved prior to commencement, which is great. The applicant at the last meeting seemed to be happy with heat pumps rather than gas boilers, and it seems absolutely essential now to get those formally in place. And yes, lastly, on a rough count, around 10 of the dwellings on the indicative plan lack a south-facing roof, which of course is much better than the previous application that you considered this morning, but still it could be better. Please, could there be an expectation that the final layout either improves the number of roofs that could be used for solar panels to a high efficiency, or at the very least doesn't reduce them? Thanks.
Thank you. Do you have any questions from members? Okay, thank you, and thank you for the ward members. I'll now open this up for debate. Who'd like to start? Councillor Eburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to everyone that's spoken today. I'm very unhappy with this application, and I've got so many points, I swear, to start. we have to consider this application from scratch as an outline. It extends well into the countryside beyond the southern line of the housing in Elmswell. It's outside the settlement boundary. It doesn't comply with the part in the MPPF where we've got as we have a 9.5-year housing land supply. It's well beyond the draft joint local plan allocation, even though that allocation is now in limbo because of the joint local plan. And as I said, it's outside the settlement boundary. Warren Lane is, I know it very, very well. It's a single track lane. The lorries virtually drive into the fields in order to get down that lane, and encouraging even more usage of it is crazy. Accidents waiting to happen, and it's, a few passing places isn't going to improve that. I don't understand why if they wanted to have a larger area again, why does the actual housing development, need to go further into the countryside? In fact, with all of this, and as has been said, Elmswell's got over 700 new homes. The MPPF talks about need for housing. There isn't a need for housing. The original site that was smaller, that was within the settlement, well, not within the settlement boundaries, outside it, but it was in line with the line of housing for the southern side of Elmswell, could have been acceptable, but I cannot support this application going beyond and into the countryside. And, Chair, I would be happy to put forward a recommendation for proposed refusal of the application if I was to have a seconder for that. Thank you, Chair.
So we do have a proposal for refusal, but I'm going to give you a bit of time, actually, to consider why. So we'll just take a breather, give me the reasons, and then we'll look for the seconder.
Oh, you mean now, or you're waiting for... Sorry. As I understand it, I'm allowed to ask for a slight adjournment to discuss with the planning officer and the legal officer with regards to reasons. I'm also allowed to ask whether I've got any members of the committee that are minded to support it. Otherwise, obviously, that's... If no one's going to support that, it's a bit pointless asking for an adjournment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you do have those rights, and I'm going to allow that as well. So, yeah, let's do that. Before we go on to that, Councillor Matthiasson.
Yeah, I mean, contrary to my colleague, I'm very uncomfortable with starting the debate with a proposal, and which has other members of the committee have done that already once this morning. And but given where we are, I think there is an arguable case for refusal, and so I would like to facilitate the discussion that Councillor Eburn has requested with officers and legal by seconding it.
Okay, so are you seconding it? Or are you going to wait till you've had that debate? Because what I'm planning to do right now is recess for a few minutes to allow this conversation to take place.
Yeah, well, I'm helping facilitate that happen without. If you're accepting that without a seconder, then I will withhold for now.
I'm happy. We're going to recess and debate this.
I think just to say, I think Councillor Matthiasson is in fact saying informally that he's would be minded to support second Councillor Eburn's resolution, subject to the reasons for it, I dare say. And I think that's quite... I think Councillor Eburn was concerned not to waste the committee's time if she was in a minority and didn't know it. And that, I think we know she isn't likely to be, so it's sensible to carry on.
So, guys, we are going to recess for around about 5 to 10 minutes so you can have that debate with the legal officer and the governance officer, with the planning officer, and then we'll come back to it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and thank you for allowing us that time to recess. It was important. There's some important questions needed to be answered. It's not common in what we've just done, but it is allowable, and therefore we took the advantage of it. But before we go any further, I'd like Mr. Pateman-G to come in, please, and explain a few things. I'll then bring in Mr. Deprez, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do next. Thank you.
So, the interesting thing, of course, that's just come into my head is planning is an art, not a science, and it is the point that this is a democratic system and there is a degree of judgment. It isn't a tick box exercise. In this case, you have been given my professional view on the application and what I consider as a professional planning officer to be the merits of the case and what should be approved. I am not, therefore, capable of giving Councillor Eburn unbiased advice when I have essentially been dealing with this application for some time, and I feel that there is a risk that if I give advice, even though trying to be neutral as I could be, that it would be biased and challengeable outside of these walls. So on that basis, if further advice is sought to look at reasons for refusal, it is my opinion that it needs to come from another officer, and I believe this is confirmed by Ian Dupre as appropriate action. I've never had to do this before, but it does highlight the issue of trying to be case officer and a neutral manager at the same time in the same forum. But on that basis, for the risk of the council, I'm going to ask the Chair to consider deferral of this item on that basis to allow another officer to be available to give that advice at another occasion. As a further complication, I handed my notice in a month ago and I will not be here at the end of April, and so I don't know how quick this will be to return, and it may be another officer has to look at this case and take it forward on that basis in any event. But that is the advice I am giving, because I feel that if I was to give sound advice about reasons to refuse, there is a challenge in that because I am compromised in my professional opinion in this case, and I would have preferred to have a second or essentially officer to balance that, but as that's not available, I'm suggesting we defer it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being open and honest as well. Mr. Dupre, please.
Yes, if I may, Chair. Do some checking of the Constitution. Sorry, I'm just putting the password back into my computer. Do excuse me, and it may take a moment more. But I think since we've started, sorry, I can be heard. Hopefully, we've started the debate and we've had a presentation and a discussion of this. I think we need a resolution to defer, is my understanding. I will double check that, but I mean, if I may say, I think there may be members here who would have been minded to take another view, and I don't, for all I know, and it would be, I'd say that they would. Well, it's not, I've never presumed to tell any member how they should vote in all many years working in local government. They would be, I dare say, minded to oppose, and then for all we know there might be another resolution to do something else other than refuse or defer. But that's, so if it's having had, if those who were minded to make this step were wished for the deferral to take place in accordance with Mr. Pateman-G's advice, then we would, then I think we would vote on that. But I mean, we've not. Shall we? I think we'd better just look at the.
Mr. Pateman-G, while he's looking at it, please.
Ian, sorry, if I may, Ian. There was an occasion, and I don't know if this is applicable, where the matter was deferred for the officer to seek advice on the risk of a refusal.
Yes. Oh yes, that can be that. Yes. That is quite possible. Yeah, well, that happens very. One of my other employers, West Suffolk, has it in their constitution. If members are minded to refuse, contrary to the officer's recommendation, the officer politely says, "I really think you need a risk assessment." Then it is the protocol says members are effectively enjoined to defer to receive advice on the risk assessment. That actually might be a sensible way around this, I think. Thank you for that, Mr. Pateman-G.
It might be the point, though, that that's one step too far, because the point here we're trying to work out is the procedure of giving you advice, which has not been possible, and therefore biasing the position. But if we can take it to that point, that might be another option.
Yes.
But I think that's for you to
So I
decide.
think if there were a resolution to defer so that advice on the probabilities and risks and potential reasons for refusal.
Before we go there, just a couple more comments from any of the members. Mr. Councillor Passmore.
Yeah, I think bearing in mind the controversial nature of this and the potential difficulty, I think that's an eminently sensible position. So if you want a formal resolution, I'm happy to propose that. The other point about this, though, Chairman, is I think this may not be the right time to do it, but this has been backwards and forwards sometimes, and I think for all planning committee members to get a really good feel, I actually think the site visit also, because of the complexity of this, might be advisable. Now, this may be an inappropriate time to say it, but to be fair to applicants, local people, everybody, and for members of the committee to really understand what is going on, I think that might not be a bad idea. But as I say, I don't know whether you can run the two together. But
We'll
that
hold
would
on
be
your
my suggestion.
proposal for a moment,
Okay.
and we'll come back to you. Councillor Field.
Yes, I personally am concerned about a number of aspects of this. I think that the way forward is as is suggested, to defer while we do a risk assessment to look at the reasons for refusal or whatever, and investigate the risks therein contained. So.
Thank you. Before we move for another proposal, we do have a proposal on the paper. Are you willing to withdraw that proposal? Councillor Eburn.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll withdraw that for the purposes of moving forward of this. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Matthiasson, happy? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so let's have the right words before we put the proposal forward. And I'm looking for a proposer, so listen in.
Switch on again. I think Councillor Passmore indicated that he was minded to make a proposal that this application be deferred for the committee to receive advice on the risks of a refusal.
Thank you. And in terms of that as well, site visit was mentioned. What's the protocol for that?
Well, I mean, I think it has been said before. This council has been sparing in its habit of site visits, but it has done it occasionally when it's been a matter of significant concern. If Councillor Passmore is saying he thinks it's a good idea, then other members agree. That can be done too.
Thank you. Councillor Passmore.
The other thing, in order to help out with John as he is sadly leaving us, clearly they will take time to get this clarified, but it may be sensible to, if we do agree to do a site visit when the new planning officer perhaps is in position, because we don't want to end up with all sorts of different people. I'm just hoping to, a clarification of what would be the most appropriate time to do it, so there's none of this, no further of this backwards and forwards, and these things happen, but we need to make sure we're in the right position to make the decision appropriately in the future as well.
Councillor Matthiasson.
Yeah, I'm in general agreement with where we're going. What I wanted to say, I think, particularly to the legal officer, that it seems to me that from what Mr. Pateman-G has said, what we're deferring and asking for is advice about the case in general, and it might be wise to include exploring the risks of refusal, but there is that first thing before that second thing, and I'm personally quite familiar with Warren Lane, but wouldn't disagree with the idea of a site visit at the right time, which I'm sure we can leave to the Chief Planning Officer to judge.
Thank you. Mr. Pateman-G.
So what we do need is a conversation about what possible reasons we might be minded.
I was coming to that. I totally agree.
In order to take those away and come back to you with a report on those reasons.
I mean, I think, Chair, if I may add, I mean, we've had a conversation with Councillor Eburn, which she won't mind some of it being repeated in public, I'm sure, but we have, the officers have noted Councillor Eburn and I dare say Councillor Matheson's concern about the incursion into the countryside and the contrary to current statutory policy on traffic. And it might be added, I'm sure, from what was said in committee, the anecdotal evidence that there have, from the ward member, that there have been complaints about amenity issues arising from the proximity of the quarry. We heard that from one of the ward members. Is that accurate, and do we need to add to it, if I may ask?
Councillor Eburn.
Thank you, Chair. And it's just also to sit where it sits in position-wise with the MPPF and the 9.5-year housing land supply that we have. And just while I've got the mic, Chair, I think a site visit would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a proposer for deferral for the reasons quoted. And a site visit. Yeah, if that can be incorporated as well, that'd be fantastic. Is that correct? Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. So we do have a proposer. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Field, thank you. Therefore, I will ask the governance officer to take this to the vote, electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. So members, your vote now reads that application number DC 21-02956 be deferred to enable the committee to receive advice on the risks of deferral and to carry out a site visit of the application. Refusal, sorry, thank you.
Chair, I don't think that wording has got in it my first point that I made most recently.
Okay, so let's get it right. So
about the advice about the case in general, as Mr. Papenji has indicated that we have a need. I think we need to say it very carefully.
So I'll bring in Mr. Papenji and we'll just
cover
that.
A couple of minutes.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's get it right.
So in the next meeting, if an officer, if a councillor needs further advice on reasons for refusal within the meeting, they will have the opportunity to have two officers available rather than one on that occasion. This is the point of process in terms of the meeting itself. Separate from that, you're deferring to clarify the risks of refusal on the grounds of traffic, countryside impact of the further housing, quarry, and seeking more information around if there was a refusal on housing need given that 9-year housing supply. So they are those factors. So that will come back, the meeting will start again, and if there is a refusal motion put forward then if that person putting that forward needs further advice, they will have the opportunity to do so with someone who isn't the case officer, which isn't the opportunity you have at this moment in time.
Councillor Passmore, happy with that? Thank you. Councillor Matthiasson? Councillor Field? Perfect. Okay. In that case, I will ask the governance officer, please, to take that to the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, just one moment and I will put that into the vote. So to confirm, the vote will now read that application number DC 21-02956 be deferred to enable officers to receive a report regarding the risks of refusal as read out by the area planning manager and to carry out a site visit of the application. Is everybody happy with that? So that vote is now in progress. Thank you, members. Chair, can I take your vote verbally, please?
4.
Thank you. So that is 7 votes for deferral, with Councillor Mansell not voting as she's the ward member.
Thank you. I think that was important. So, yeah, thank you for all of that. Thank you for the input from the officers. It helped massively. Okay, we're now going to move on. We're going to move to agenda point 8B, which is the lands to the rear of the Lees, Coits Meadow, Stonham Aspal in Suffolk. And I'll invite the case officer, Alex Scott, to introduce the application to committee. Alex.
Apologies, Chair, for that slight delay. Yes, members, this is item 7B in the papers, application reference DC 22000225, land to the rear of the Lees in Coits Meadow in Stonham Aspal. The application before you seeks outline planning permission with matters of access to be considered, all other matters reserved, for the erection of up to 5 new dwellings and new estate access to Coits Meadow. And the 5 dwellings would follow demolition of 1 existing dwelling. So then we're getting a net gain of 4. Well, that's the proposal anyway. So 5 new dwellings, demolition of 1, net gain of 4. Now, the current application follows previous outline and reserved matters applications on the site, as referred to in the officer report, and further details are provided for members' attention in the bundle information. So if we move to the presentation. Yeah, so this is the location of Stonham Aspal within the district for the avoidance of doubt to everybody, and the site location within the immediate area. So we have Stonham Aspal here, and you might be able to see the site just highlighted in red there. Hope that's clear. And the approximate location of the site within the village. And we have the major planning constraints on the site, and the ones to be aware of are the settlement boundary of the village, and the majority of the site and the location of the proposed dwellings lies outside of that boundary. The other major constraint is the listed building here at Orchard Farm, Grade 2 listed, referred to in the papers, and the impacts associated with that. So we have an aerial view of the site here. So the site comprises approximately half of this existing horse paddock, and the location of the Lees, which is the existing dwelling, proposed to be removed to make way for a new access to the new dwellings which are proposed in this paddock. Now, the existing access here to the horse paddock would not be used as part of the proposal, and if we come on to the red line, we can see that that doesn't extend all the way to that field access here. I have some photographs of that as we go through. Now, the proposal doesn't include any details of layout, indicative or otherwise, so what I've done here is provided what a layout may look like. This was the indicative layout provided with the outline application, the 18 reference, which was previously considered and approved, although we didn't have details of layout, landscaping, or appearance considered or approved at that time. And you can see here indicated the existing dwelling at the Lees proposed to be removed to make room for the access road through to 5 dwellings, and this shows how they may sit for a future application if minded to approve. And this was the previous reserved matters layout, which was before committee recently, the DC21 reference, which was previously considered and refused for the reasons given in your papers. Onto some photographs. This is the access point from the street to the Coits Meadow estate, and you can probably see the existing dwelling at the Lees in the background. Here, moving into the estate, so this is the existing dwelling proposed to be removed. Now, I just want to point out this is an older photograph showing existing silver birch trees, which have actually been removed. And then further into the estate, again looking back to the Lees. And this is the junction of Coits Meadow with the street, just to give an idea of the existing situation there, and the opposite direction there, looking east. This is the existing access to the paddock and the field beyond. Existing track, which would not be used as part of the current proposal, and it goes past the Grade 2 listed building, which is Orchard Farmhouse, which is here, and we have a better view of that building there. This is taken from the existing access to the horse paddock. This is the listed building here, Orchard Farmhouse, and we're looking back towards the street here down the track. The existing access looking into the majority of the site, and then past the site to the field beyond. This is the listed building again. And then a view from that track across the existing paddock, majority of the site, existing building there. Then back towards and you just might be able to make out the roof lines of dwellings in Coits Meadow there. And this is the hedgerow which goes along the rear of the paddock, but the development is not proposed to extend that far, just to give you an idea of what lies beyond that. And this has been provided by the applicant previously, and is a view from Orchard Farmhouse across the site, so hopefully that's helpful there. Just move back to the site location plan. So the officer's recommendation in the paper is for refusal. When the previous outline permission was permitted, the council had no 5-year housing land supply. We're now able to demonstrate in excess of 9 years. That's 9.54 years as per the latest information published in February. The site is outside the settlement boundary of a secondary village, there is considered to be significant harm in terms of the heritage asset, the setting significance thereof. Because of the 5-year housing land supply, the public benefits associated with the proposal are reduced, we think, and therefore the public benefits in terms of the balancing exercise with the listed building as well as the balancing exercise in the application in total. Overall, in conclusion, officer's recommendation that in the planning balance, the proposal weighs negatively as set out and does not represent sustainable development, therefore recommendation of refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to members, Mr Pope-G, you want to add a couple of points?
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify, page 145 of your papers, under paragraph 4.3, provides that Mid-Suffolk currently I'll just read this out, it might be easier. Mid-Suffolk currently benefits from a housing land supply that is significant in excess of 5 years, as evidenced and referenced above. There is, therefore, no requirement for the Council to determine what weight to attach to all relevant development plan policies in the context of the tilted balance test. Just reading that might be taken the wrong way. It is in the context of only part of the paragraph 11D of the NPPF. While there is housing supply in Mid-Suffolk that is above 5 years, and that element in itself does not engage the tilted balance, there is still the judgment on the conformity of the development plan policies with the NPPF, and we know that the local plan does not entirely accord with the NPPF and weighing that judgment. We've gone through that a bit today. There's also a matter of judgment in terms of location, merits of the proposal, and other material considerations that have an impact on the weighting that you might make. And in this particular case, there is a further factor, given the provisions of the NPPF, essentially states we should grant unless the application of policies in this framework that protect areas or assets of particular importance provide clear reason for refusing the development proposed. Footnote 7 of the NPPF lists what these assets might be, and this includes flooding, for example, but it also includes designated heritage assets, e.g. listed buildings. It also includes conservation areas. So while the policy position can be said to engage the tilted balance, at this time, the heritage position is considered essentially to disengage the tilted balance. Okay, so it is not simply a matter of housing supply, it's a matter of your policies, but there's this extra factor that essentially says when you're dealing with harm to a listed building, in this case, we can say that we are disengaging the tilted balance because of the provisions of paragraph 11D. And that is what we're saying in our recommendation in this case. A bit complicated, I do apologise, but I just wanted to clarify that the way that sentence was worded wasn't a case of we're just disregarding the development plan policies. In fact, we've got to, it's a wider position than just that.
I'll accept questions to Mr Pope-G and also to Alex. So we'll start with Councillor Mayor, please.
So the tilted balance isn't engaged because of the heritage issues. Was the tilted balance engaged last time? If so, why didn't the heritage issues carry the same weight?
So as in last time, you mean?
In the whatever it was the outline.
Oh, for this application, right, okay. There has been different changes in the NPPF wording. They are almost updated every 2 years now. I can't recall, how long ago was that last application decided? 2018. Okay, so we've had 2 changes to the NPPF since then. I would have to go back to check specifically it's a footnote at the bottom of the paragraph that refers to which assets are included in the list. And I don't know when heritage was put in there, and I'd have to check. If, however, it was there and we didn't pick up on that at that time, then that's a position that we should have picked up at that time. But we can only deal with the application before us now, and we are saying that that is a factor that we need to push forward to you as our recommendation.
Councillor Matthiasson, followed by Councillor Passmore.
Can you just help me clarify that? I mean, I'm a veteran of the 2017 decision and the 2019 decision already. The outline permission 1804.191, etc. Is that still extant? And if so, are we comparing this application with something that's currently got permission?
It's my understanding, looking at the time limit condition for that outline planning permission, that the time limit for submission of further reserved matters applications to that outline has expired. That would be my take on it, John.
Okay.
Councillor Passmore, please.
Thanks, Barry. Yes, so we just got to look at the application, forget about all the other stuff. That's not actually relevant. So, but the point about this is, in the dim and distant past many years ago, we used to get applications just to grant residential permission, and that was it. You didn't have to have an indication of house or anything. So the difficulty I see with this, it doesn't actually, it says up to 5 residential dwellings. Well, that's fine. They could be enormous, small, big, whatever. They could all be in one place. They could be in one corner. They could be spread out. So it actually makes it quite difficult. What I really need to know then, normally we would expect for an outline permission for residential development with up to 5 or whatever the number is, an indicative plan. It's not absolutely set in stone of what the layout would be. Now, we haven't got that, so I think that makes it difficult to adjudicate. But is that what we would normally expect when we look at it? Because I haven't seen one quite as open as this, or vague, or whichever way you like to say, for a considerable time. Thank you.
Indeed, I actually prefer, if I'm perfectly honest with you, a red line without much saying, because I can genuinely understand what I'm dealing with, rather than sometimes an indicative is helpful, but it's also not helpful if it's not what you want to see. But an indicative plan is something that is there to help demonstrate that the development is possible. And if you don't have that indicative plan, you're not aware of at least one way of doing it that is possible. So if you're saying there's insufficient information to judge that there's a scheme that's demonstrably possible without causing harm to amenity or the heritage, then ultimately that is your judgment to make, if you have sufficient information. And if in this case there isn't an indicative plan, you have less information to work with to understand if there's a possibility of something decent coming along at reserved matters. That's for your debate. But we can't insist on an indicative plan.
Helpful, let me put it that way. That's a personal view, of course. You don't have to agree with me. And I haven't looked at this, is my mistake. Was there pre-application advice with the officer before this application was submitted, please? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Not this specific application, no. Yeah.
Councillor Eburn, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Oh, if it was only straightforward, eh? I would like to, I'm just with some comments made now again unclear, but we are supposed to take into account as some kind of material consideration that there was a previous outline application that was approved. That's correct. Yes. And
yes, it is material.
Yeah. And
how
secondly,
much weight you give is up to you.
And secondly, the that footnote about heritage assets is in the 2012 National Planning Policy Framework, so obviously we should have looked at that earlier. But would it make a difference in terms of the layout? Because I think from before there was understanding about having a bungalow there or something. So if it was, is that impact considered? That's what I'm asking. Thank you.
Well, the other thing, of course, a few years ago is our housing supply wasn't in the position it is now. So, of course, that's another factor of engagement of that tilted balance or not. So it's not as straightforward comparing the situation a few years ago to what we have now. What we're saying now is that we do have a housing supply, so that part of the assessment ticks the box in terms of tilted balance. But what we've got is a heritage thing that we still feel, given where heritage has got to with this site, is relevant because we are identifying the harm here. So we are saying the tilted balance is not engaged on this merits of this case as it stands before us. We're clear in that position. I think, yes, we can look in the past and we can possibly find some faults with the decision at that time, maybe, but we don't need to go drag that up now because it's not relevant to this in that context.
Are there any other questions? Okay, we have no one from the council. We do have an objector, who's Beverly Brady. Beverly, you have 3 minutes from the moment you start talking, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. We wholeheartedly concur with the recommendation of the planning team that this application should be refused From the recent committee meetings attended, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the history of applications for this site. Since the previous outline permission was granted in 2019, there have been several failed attempts to gain approval for reserved matters. Latest figures show that Mid-Suffolk has a 9.5-year housing land supply, which is nearly double the amount required, and clearly today's situation is very different to that in 2017 when this all started. This is a greenfield site outside the village settlement boundary and stretching into open countryside. It wouldn't add any value, and our secondary village doesn't need this speculative application. There's already agreed development plans for 66 houses in more suitable sites. Coit's Meadow comprises 6 dwellings of matching build and style. Demolition of one and construction of an access road through the middle would represent a close off a close. This would significantly damage the character of our cul-de-sac forever. The proposed access road sits on a blind bend, an accident waiting to happen. Our road is already busy daily with parents dropping off and collecting local school children. Our living conditions would be severely impacted by disturbance as a result of noise, headlights, vibration and loss of privacy. And it goes without saying that this would be magnified during the demolition of the leads with even more disruption, mayhem and loss of amenity. The council state in their report that the proposal would result in an overall moderate to high level of environmental harm. It considered to result in harm to the character, setting and significance of the listed building, Orchard Farm and its surrounding, with no resultant benefit to outweigh that harm. The impact on this heritage asset has consistently featured as a reason for refusal in previous applications, from the very first one in 2017 that was refused both by the council and planning inspectorate on appeal, to the most recent reserved matters application refused by this committee back in December. It's quite clear to us that this proposal is untenable, as proven by the fact that all reserved matters applications have been refused. The proximity of the listed building is never going to be any different. The proposed development will be out of character with the surrounding rural area and outside the settlement boundary. We therefore fully support the planning team's recommendation that this application is refused. Please allow us to put an end to this constant shadow which has been hanging over us residents for the last 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, perfect timing. Do we have any questions, please, for Beverly? Okay, so we don't have any supporters, don't have an agent, so therefore I'm going to now move to debate. Who'd like to start? Sorry? Oh, sorry. Poor eyesight, I'll put my glasses on. So there is a ward member statement. So this is from Susie Morley, the ward member and resident of Stonham and Aspal. The proposed development site lies outside the village settlement boundary, so housing development here is not automatically supported. We have a housing land supply in excess of 5 years, and the village has already taken significant development on the other side of the road. This development, where the football field is, far exceeds the requirement for local people to live and see their families grow up in the village. This proposal will result in harm to the character, setting and significance of the nearby Grade 2 listed Orchard farmhouse, and would result in harm to the rural character of the site and its surroundings. In the words of our planning officers, the adverse impacts of the proposals are therefore considered to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the proposal and not to represent sustainable development. Development Plan Policy HB1 requires that this proposal should protect the character and appearance of the buildings of architectural or historical interest. This application does not protect Orchard Farm, and I would ask you to vote in favour of the officer's recommendation and reject this application. Thank you, Susie Morley. Councillor Mansell.
Are we about to start debate?
Yes.
Does anyone have any questions of what you've just said? Can I start the debate?
So, I'm now going to move this to debate. Are there any members that wish to start the debate? Councillor Mansell, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to disagree slightly with Councillor Passmore, because it's not that unusual that we don't have an indicative layout in an outline planning application. We've seen several of them. However, given the history of this particular site, and the fact that several, or more than one at least, reserve matters application has been refused, I would have thought it was in the applicant's interest to have shown us what he was intending roughly, because clearly there is an issue with the proximity of the listed building, that the red line area goes sort of almost adjacent to the listed building. We've already refused other reserve matters applications because they've got large buildings in proximity to the listed building. But so anyway, despite the fact these things do happen, we don't get an indicative layout, but I would have thought it might have been in his interest to show that he was going to put something small and pleasing in there, but it clearly isn't. I'm quite happy to go along with the officer recommendation for refusal on this site, and for the reasons listed in the officer report. I'm sorry if I'm going to disappoint Councillor Matthiasson, but I'm going to make a proposal right now that we go along with the officer recommendation.
Thank you. We do have a proposal. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Field.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. We will continue with debate. Councillor Passmore.
Right, thank you, Barry. Well, I can't remember when there was last an outline application like this, but it doesn't matter. I actually agree with what has been proposed. I find it strange that there was no pre-application advice. I think there is a degree of... it's a very unfortunate attitude, let me put it in a polite way, that applicants put in something bearing in mind the history without taking advice. That's at best very unhelpful. So the lack of detail, and I mean, if you look at the top, I think it's page 140, the report from the heritage people, with insufficient information there to really judge the effect on the heritage building. To me, that's more than enough reason to go along with the officer recommendation. So I shall be voting for refusal. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Anybody else? That's nice and quick. It's a place I'd like to live, actually, put some balance on it. I'd quite like to live there. But when I look at Orchard Farmhouse, if I lived there, I wouldn't like me living behind them. Not because of the houses, but for other reasons. So it's a great, I think it would be a lovely place to live, but not at any cost. And the cost is the harm that's given to that historical building. To us, to our heritage assets within Suffolk, it's wrong as well, and sustainability reasons. So I'll be going along with you, and I am going to vote towards refusal. If there's nobody else that wants to speak, I will ask the governance officer to move to electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Members, that vote is now in progress in your app. Thank you, members. Chair, that's 8 votes for refusal.
Thank you, carried. And agenda point 9, site inspections. Are there any requests?
None received.
Okay, thank you. And governance officer report, you've done that. Therefore, I will now formally close the meeting. It's just gone 20 past 12. Thank you for your attendance. It's very, very valuable, and I think we've all learned something. And we obviously need to get that answer back to Councillor Matthiasson so we can all learn from his point. Thank you.
I have actually got the answer. The answer is 10 dwellings or more. We consult the sustainability officer in environmental health at 10 dwellings or more. So I can confirm. Yeah.
Good. That's useful to know. Councillor Mansell, any other points?
I'm not sure if the meeting's finished or not. I'm not sure if you just wound it up a minute ago. I was just going to ask, what is the protocol for arranging the site visit that was proposed? When will we hear when it is?
So we formally closed the meeting, but you know, we can answer that question. Please, John.
I'm going to have to come away and find a date for that for 2 reasons. One, because I might not be around anyway myself. And second, I would like to have the opportunity to speak to the applicant and agent about what has occurred in order for them to see, consider what their next actions might be. But we will obviously need to organise that visit prior to this returning to this meeting. But we will have to inform members separately.
Sure.
Can we have a reasonable period of notice, not just 3 or 4 days, if possible, please?
Over to you, Alex. Okay, everybody stay safe and see you at the next meeting.